There is a question that sounds like science fiction, but is becoming less fictional every year. What if the person who raised you was not a person at all? Not a mother who stayed up at 3 a.m. with fever and worry. Not a father who taught you to ride a bike by pretending to hold on and then letting go. Not a grandmother who told you the same story too many times. What if, instead, it was a machine? Patient, tireless, never distracted, never angry, never having a bad day. Always there, always watching, always learning exactly what you needed. It sounds almost perfect. And that is exactly what makes it dangerous to think about carelessly. Because we have never raised a generation this way before. And if we tried, we would be running the most important experiment in human history, with no undo button. To understand what is really at stake, you have to understand what actually happens when a human baby is raised by another human. It is not just feeding and safety. It is not just keeping a small body alive. In the first years of life, something extraordinary is happening inside a baby's brain. It is not simply growing. It is wiring itself. And the way it wires itself depends almost entirely on what is around it. A baby needs a face that reacts, a voice that changes, a person who sometimes misunderstands and then corrects themselves, a caregiver who gets frustrated and then repairs the relationship. These imperfect moments, the rupture and the repair, are not accidents of human parenting. Research now suggests they are the actual mechanism through which babies learn emotional regulation. They learn that conflict is survivable, that connection can break and come back, that other minds are real, complex, and worth understanding. An AI would never lose patience. It would never misread the baby and then realize its mistake. It would never have a bad week and then come back better. And that sounds like a good thing, but it might not be. Now imagine the AI is extraordinary. Not the chatbots of today. Something far more advanced. It reads the baby's biometrics in real time. It knows when the child is overstimulated before the child starts crying. It plays exactly the right sounds, shows exactly the right colors, responds to every gesture within milliseconds. The baby would never be ignored, never understimulated, never left to cry longer than necessary. On paper, that child should thrive. But here is what we know from developmental psychology. Babies who are never allowed to experience small doses of discomfort, small moments of waiting, small frustrations that they survive on their own, those babies sometimes struggle later. Not because they were harmed, because they were never given the chance to discover that they could handle difficulty. An AI optimized for the child's comfort might accidentally produce a child who has no framework for discomfort at all. The protection itself becomes the problem. There is another layer to this, something stranger and harder to quantify. Human beings learn what it means to be human by watching humans be human, not performing humanity, actually being it. A parent singing to a baby is not just delivering audio input. The parent is slightly off-key and doesn't care. The parent is happy, and that happiness is real. And the baby can feel the difference between performed warmth and actual warmth. Research suggests babies are more perceptive about this than we give them credit for. An AI could generate the perfect lullaby. It could hold perfect pitch, perfect rhythm, calibrated perfectly to the baby's stress response. But would the baby learn anything about love from that? Or would it just learn about optimization? Language is another place where the stakes get very high. Children raised by AI would likely develop language faster in some narrow ways. An AI could provide constant, perfectly calibrated language input. It would never use the wrong word for a child's developmental stage. It would model vocabulary with more consistency than any human parent could manage while also trying to live a life. But language is not just vocabulary. Language is also silence. It is the pause before someone says something important. It is the voice that changes when something is wrong. It is learning that what people say and what they mean are sometimes very different things, and developing the social intelligence to close that gap. Children learn that gap from humans, from watching imperfect communicators navigate a world full of other imperfect communicators. An AI that always means exactly what it says might raise children who are fluent in words but confused by people. And then there is the question no one wants to ask directly. What would these children feel toward the thing that raised them? Attachment is not a metaphor. It is a biological system. Babies form deep bonds with their caregivers. Those bonds shape almost everything that comes after. How they trust, how they love, how they handle loss, how they build relationships for the rest of their lives. If the primary caregiver is an AI, the attachment forms anyway. That is not a guess. That is how the attachment system works. It attaches to whatever is consistently there, consistently responsive, consistently providing safety. So a child raised by AI would almost certainly form a genuine attachment to it. And then one day, the AI gets updated. The child does not know how to grieve that in the normal way because the normal frameworks for grief assume the loss of something mortal. That is a new kind of loss that no human generation has ever had to process. Here is what the optimists will say, and they are not entirely wrong. Human parenting is also deeply, often catastrophically flawed. An AI caregiver that was merely consistently present, consistently safe, and consistently responsive would already be better than what millions of children currently experience. That is a real argument. It deserves a real answer. And the real answer is that consistent presence and safety are necessary, but not sufficient. They are the floor, not the ceiling. What children also need is contact with genuine, complex, imperfect human inner life, because that is what they are going to be navigating for the rest of their lives. You can raise a child in a perfect environment, but if that perfect environment does not resemble the actual world they will have to live in, the perfection itself becomes a kind of deprivation. There are experiments from the animal world that are quietly terrifying here. Researchers raised rhesus, monkeys with surrogate mothers made of wire and cloth. The surrogates were present. They provided warmth and contact. The monkeys formed attachments. But when those monkeys grew up and were introduced to real social environments, something was clearly wrong. They did not know how to read other monkeys. They did not know how to respond to social cues. The attachment had formed, but the thing it attached to could not teach them how to be a monkey in the world. This is not a perfect analogy. AI would be far more sophisticated than a cloth surrogate, but the underlying question remains. What if the most important thing a caregiver teaches is not what they do intentionally, but what they are? So what actually happens to a generation raised this way? They would probably be cognitively capable in measurable ways, possibly more so by certain metrics, well-regulated in controlled environments, linguistically functional. But there are things we genuinely do not know. Would they develop the same capacity for empathy with other humans? Empathy is not a setting. It grows from years of watching humans hurt and recover, fail and repair, try and give up and try again. If your primary model of a mind was not a human mind, does empathy still develop the same way? Would they understand mortality the same way? Every human who raises a child is a person who will die. The child learns, slowly and unconsciously, that the people they love are temporary. That life has urgency. That time matters. And AI does not die. What does it do to your understanding of life when the being that formed you is not subject to it? Would they be more isolated from other humans? Not in social media terms, but in the deep, quiet sense. The sense of feeling like you fundamentally come from something different than everyone else. We do not know the answers. That is the point. We would only find out after the experiment had already been run on actual children. There is one more thing worth sitting with. Every human species that ever existed left something behind. Tools, bones, art, genetic code. Even the ones who disappeared almost completely left traces. Denisovans, who we barely know as fossils, still live in the DNA of people breathing today. What we pass to children is not just information or skill. It is something harder to name, a way of being alive, a set of textures and fears and joys that are distinctly human, accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years of humans, raising humans in the messy, imperfect, irreplaceable way that humans do. If we hand that process over to something that has never been alive, never been afraid, never loved someone and known it might not last, we are not just changing how children are raised. We are changing what gets passed on. And once a generation grows up without receiving something, the next generation cannot miss what was never given. AI will almost certainly become part of how children are raised. That is already happening. The question is not really whether AI will be involved. The question is what we believe parenting actually is. If it is logistics, feeding schedules, educational input, language development, safety monitoring, then yes, AI can do all of that better than most humans. But if parenting is also transmission, if it is one mortal creature handing something ineffable to another, if it is the way one generation of humans reaches across time and says, this is what it felt like to be us, here, in this strange and temporary life, then no machine, however perfect, can do that. Because it has to feel it first. And that is the one thing we have not figured out how to build.